I was recently asked, do you need to 150 max a contest if it allows you to enter 150 contests? Or can you enter less than that and still be able to compete? Now, I think that question is twofold, and I'm going to dive into it right now in episode 4 of the Golden Mike Minute. All right, I'm using Fantasy Cruncher's lineup study to dive into this information. Now, we've gone back through the NFL DraftKings Millie Maker for the entire 2018, 2019, and 2020 NFL seasons. We found very few winners of the Millie Maker on DraftKings who actually won 50 max. In fact, the large portion of every single season had about 80% or more of the users had single entry winners. Wild amounts of winners where they entered 9 lineups, 5 lineups, 3 lineups. But those are specifically to those contests where, there's 500,000 entrants and it's a dart throw in the middle of a 500,000 other dart throws. And it's very, very hard. It's not like you raise your odds very much by having 5 lineups compared to somebody who has 50 or 150. But then we started looking at the $9 slant. I did on the side. And I found a lot more 150 maxers starting to win those. Well, the $9 slant was often, they had 2 of them actually this NFL season, was often a 30,000 person contest. And they also had even down to about 7,000 or 8,000 people. And you could do the same with the $5 as well on DraftKings, where it was even less entrants. And you were able to actually enter 3% of the total entries, which means if there are 15,000 entries for a tournament, 10% of that is 1,500, 1% is 150. So if there are 15,000 entries in a tournament and you can enter 150 of them, you now have 1% of all of the entries. So you take up 1% of the entire field's worth of entries, which means theoretically 100 different people could 150 max it before anybody else enters, and it's just those 100 people against themselves. That's it. Now, the $5 often this year ended up being around 5,000 people, a little over 5,000, which means when you 150 maxed it, you were entering 3% of the entire field. You were able to put in 150 entries, which was just around 3%, a little bit under 2.8%. And that means you had yourself a solid opportunity where, you controlled just about 3% of 3% of the field's entries, and you're against 97% of the entries instead of your 150 lineups against 99.9%, which is what happens in those large Millie Makers. So I think if you look at it like that and you're starting to look at the contest selection and the contest size, if you can enter 1, 2, 3%, which is the max, on a website and be able to max it out, and you can financially do that, you could absorb the blow on a bad day, I think it's a viable option. I think if you're looking at those really, really large tournaments where you're not even entering 1% of your lineups, 1% of the field, you could probably go less, half, a third. I think it's totally viable. And when I started looking at NBA, the one thing I found as I had led off this podcast was I think the 2 slates are entirely different, the 2 sports. NFL is just a little bit more volatile. It relies on touchdowns, relies on large stacks, big game stacks, 4 and 5 mans. You're talking about correlation like crazy. NBA is a little bit more predictable. It's a little bit more projectable and a lot more consistent. And in fact, when you start going through, and I'm looking right now at the fadeaway on, it was the 23rd on Saturday. I looked at Sunday as well. We're going to keep going back through here, but my initial assessment was going to say, you should throw in 150 bullets, because if you trust your projection source, and you've had a good projection source for the season, like teamriseorfall.com has, you want to enter as many lineups as you possibly can in each tournament, which means you have to make sure you're ready to scale up if you're going to be playing these larger tournaments that are a little bit pricier. I'm going to dive into this a little bit more on today's 11:30 a.m. Eastern Twitch and YouTube stream. And I will be looking into this as much as I can over the next couple of weeks. I'll report back to you with what I find. I hope you enjoyed this. Hit that 5-star like button down below on iTunes and Spotify. Hit the follow button. If you're watching on YouTube, smash that like button. And again, please, it's free content. Subscribe, and I'll see you on the inside of teamriseorfall.com. Take care, my friends.